Did you know that Keith Conley, a man from Louisville, Tennessee, vanished one early morning while driving his white Ford Ranger on his way to work? What began as a routine day turned into a haunting mystery that gripped the community for weeks. Keith was last seen leaving his home before dawn. His family expected him to return from work by midday, but he never did. The hours passed, and when Keith failed to answer calls, search parties were organized. Friends, neighbors, and local authorities combed the roads, woods, and nearby areas, desperate to find any sign of Keith. For days, nothing was found. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Then, after days of searching, a grim discovery was made. Keith's white Ford Ranger was found crashed deep in a ravine, miles away from the main road. The truck was badly damaged, the impact severe. Inside, authorities found Keith deceased, but the circumstances surrounding his death raised more questions than answers. How did his truck end up in such a remote and dangerous location? What caused the crash, and why was Keith so far off his usual route? As investigators pieced together the evidence, strange details began to emerge. The crash site showed no signs of other vehicles or witnesses. The terrain was treacherous, yet there was no explanation for why Keith's truck had veered off the road. Some wondered if foul play was involved. Others speculated about an accident. Perhaps Keith lost control in the early morning darkness. But no definitive cause was ever established. Keith's family struggled to come to terms with the loss and the unanswered questions. His sudden disappearance and death left a permanent scar on those who loved him. The case of Keith Conley remains one of Tennessee's haunting mysteries, a story of disappearance, tragedy, and a search for answers that may never come. What really happened that morning? The truth remains lost in the ravine, buried beneath the silence of the forest. Let's rewind to the days leading up to Keith's disappearance. Known by friends as a dependable, hard-working man, Keith had no known enemies. His life was simple: work, family, and his beloved truck. A white Ford Ranger that was more than just a vehicle. It was a trusted companion on his daily routes. On the morning he vanished, the weather was clear, but the roads were still slick with overnight dew. Early light barely pierced the dense trees lining the rural roads Keith took. It was a familiar path, one he had driven countless times before. Witnesses near the last known location recall hearing the distant sound of a truck engine, but nothing unusual was noted. Yet sometime after that, Keith's truck was found off the beaten path, damaged and silent. The investigation focused on several key questions. Had Keith been distracted? Was there mechanical failure? Or had someone else been involved? Autopsy reports showed injuries consistent with the crash impact, but no signs of struggle or foul play were confirmed. Toxicology tests returned negative for alcohol or drugs. Keith's phone records didn't show any unusual activity. Still, the odd location of the crash, deep in a ravine, perplexed authorities. Access to the site was difficult, and the truck's position suggested it had left the road intentionally or had been forced off it. The local community was shaken. Keith was well liked, a familiar face in Louisville. Candlelight vigils were held, and his family pleaded for anyone with information to come forward. Over time, conspiracy theories and rumors swirled. Some whispered about a possible abduction. Others suspected a cover-up, but without evidence, the case remained open, a silent wound in the town's history. What lessons can we draw from Keith Conley's story? It's a reminder of how fragile life can be and how quickly the ordinary can turn into the extraordinary or the tragic. Though the truth remains elusive, Keith's memory endures in those who remember him and in the haunting mystery that still calls out for answers. As the investigation into Keith Conley's death deepened, detectives began to revisit every detail with fresh eyes. The crash site itself told part of the story. The ravine was steep and difficult to access, surrounded by dense forest. Yet, there was something unusual about how Keith's truck ended up there. Search teams discovered faint tire marks on a narrow dirt path leading away from the main road, tracks that didn't seem consistent with a simple loss of control. These tire marks appeared to have been made deliberately, as if someone had purposefully driven off-road. Investigators questioned locals about any strange sightings around the time Keith vanished. One farmer mentioned seeing a shadowy figure near the road the night before, but no one could say for certain if that had anything to do with the case. Meanwhile, Keith's family started sharing memories, painting a picture of a man who was more than just a worker. He was a husband, a father, a friend, someone loved deeply. Keith's wife revealed that in the weeks before his disappearance, Keith seemed distracted. He'd been receiving mysterious phone calls late at night, but wouldn't say who was on the line. Some wondered if he was involved in something dangerous, but no one knew what. As the days turned to weeks, local news outlets covered the story extensively, shining a spotlight on the unsolved mystery. The community rallied together, holding search parties and vigils, but the silence around Keith's fate remained deafening. The case grew colder, and with it, hope faded. Yet, a small group of amateur sleuths took it upon themselves to dig deeper. They scoured social media, local archives, and old police reports for any overlooked clues. They discovered a strange pattern. Several similar disappearances had occurred in the region over the past decade, all involving vehicles found abandoned or crashed in remote locations. Could there be a connection? Was there a larger mystery lurking beneath the surface? As time passed, Keith's story became a legend whispered among locals. A chilling reminder of the dangers hidden in quiet places, his white Ford Ranger remains a haunting symbol of a life cut short, and a mystery still begging to be solved. As months passed, official investigators decided to revisit the case with fresh technology. They employed drone surveillance to map the rugged ravine terrain in detail. What they found was startling. Subtle marks on the soil suggested that Keith's truck might have been moved after the crash. Detectives interviewed people who had close contact with Keith in the weeks before his disappearance. One coworker mentioned that Keith had recently gotten involved with a local business deal that seemed to be causing stress. No one knew the details, but it seemed significant. Meanwhile, a mysterious anonymous tip came into the police department, claiming knowledge of the night Keith disappeared. The tip suggested that Keith had been lured off the road by an unknown person or persons, but the caller refused to provide more information or come forward publicly. The family's anguish deepened as hope and suspicion intertwined. Were they dealing with a tragic accident or something more sinister? The uncertainty was the hardest burden to bear. Local news stations covered the new developments, and public interest surged again. Some members of the community began organizing their own investigations, determined to uncover the truth. This renewed focus led to the discovery of a hidden camera on a nearby private property. While the footage was grainy, it showed a vehicle matching Keith's Ford Ranger driving slowly along the road shortly before the estimated time of the crash. What the camera did not capture was how or why the vehicle left the road. As the investigation continued, questions mounted. Was Keith's death a tragic accident, or had he been the victim of a calculated crime? What secrets lay buried deep in that ravine? The answers, if they ever come, promised to reveal a story far darker than anyone imagined. In the cold winter months, when the forest surrounding the ravine was blanketed with snow, investigators returned to search for overlooked evidence. They found subtle footprints near the crash site, small enough to suggest another person had been present. This discovery reignited speculation of foul play. However, no matching suspects emerged from initial inquiries. Was this a passerby? Someone involved? The mystery deepened. Thank you for joining us as we continue to explore the story of Keith Conley. Stay tuned for updates as new information comes to light. The story continues, and so does the search for answers.